My name is Clara and I am 35 years old. For most of my life I have been invisible. I have scrubbed floors until my knees ached, polished windows until my hands cracked, and carried the secrets of the wealthy in silence. People passed me by without a glance, their eyes sliding past me as though I were part of the furniture, not a woman with dreams and scars of her own. I learned early that being unseen could sometimes be a shield, but more often it was a wound that never healed. That morning the grand hall of Bennett Enterprises glittered with light from the chandeliers above. I was on my knees scrubbing a marble floor so polished it reflected the ceiling like a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, hair pulled back too tightly, a face that bore the weight of too many sleepless nights. Around me, men in tailored suits strode past, their shoes clicking against the floor I had just cleaned. None of them saw me. None of them ever did, except for him. Logan Bennett, the millionaire everyone revered and feared, walked into the room. His presence shifted the air, every conversation pausing for a heartbeat. He carried himself like a man carved from stone, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. I ducked my head, hoping to vanish into the marble beneath me. But as he passed, his gaze flickered toward me just for an instant, sharp and searching, as if he saw through the layers of invisibility I had wrapped around myself. My chest tightened, but I bent lower, scrubbing harder, pretending I hadn't noticed. Later that day I was assigned to clean the boardroom. The room smelled of leather and power, its long table gleaming under the golden light. Stacks of documents were spread across the surface, waiting for the meeting that would soon take place. I wiped the chairs, polished the glass, and tried not to look at the papers, though one caught my eye. A bold heading, Merger Agreement. My reading skills weren't perfect, but I recognized enough to sense its weight. My pulse quickened. As I gathered my supplies, the door opened and Logan entered with his lawyers. Their voices were hushed but urgent. I shrank against the wall, invisible again, or so I thought. They didn't dismiss me. They barely acknowledged I was there. The lawyers laid the documents before Logan, their pens ready, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. I lingered longer than I should have, dusting the same corner over and over until my eyes skimmed a line buried deep in the text. My breath caught. It was a clause, subtle, hidden, designed to strip control away from Logan once he signed. Whoever drafted it had buried the trap well, but I knew deception when I saw it. I had lived with it, survived it. My heart thundered in my chest. Logan picked up the pen, poised to sign. My throat went dry, fear clawing at me. Who was I to speak? I was just a cleaning lady. My voice carried no weight here, and yet something inside me refused to stay silent. "Don't sign this," I whispered. The words slipped out before I could stop them, barely louder than a breath, but the room stilled. Logan's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. For a heartbeat no one moved. The lawyers turned incredulous, their faces twisted with disdain. "What did you say?" Logan's voice was low, dangerous. Heat rushed to my face, shame and terror colliding, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. There's something wrong in that contract." My voice trembled, but I pressed on. "Please, don't sign it." The silence was suffocating. The lawyers scoffed, one of them sneering. "Mr. Bennett, are you going to take advice from the help she can't possibly understand?" Sibly. But Logan's eyes didn't leave mine. There was a flicker there, a spark of something I couldn't name. Slowly, deliberately, he set the pen down. "Leave us," he ordered. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that brooked no argument. The lawyers protested, but he silenced them with a single look. Reluctantly, they gathered their things and left, casting me glares sharp enough to cut. When the door closed, it was just the two of us. My knees felt weak, my hands trembling around the rag I still clutched. I had crossed a line that could cost me my job, maybe more. But Logan stepped closer, his expression unreadable, his gaze burning into me. "You saw something," he said quietly. "What was it?" My voice barely held. "There's a clause. Buried deep. It gives them power. Once you sign, you lose control. It's hidden, but..." I recognized it. His brows furrowed. "How?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Because I've lived with men who hide their traps in words. Who promise one thing but take everything. I just know. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to my shock, his lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, not of amusement, but of something like respect. That moment was the beginning of everything I never expected. He didn't ask me to repeat myself. He slid the stack of papers toward me, as if I were a colleague, not the woman who scrubbed the smudges from his windows, and said, "Show me." My fingers hovered over the contract, afraid to leave a print where I had no right to touch, but the urgency in his voice steadied me. I flipped to the page I had memorized in a glance, the one whose lines looked harmless until they leaned together like teeth. The sub-paragraph was narrow, the font a fraction smaller, the language dressed up like generosity, mutual oversight, interim committee routine transition. But tucked at the end of a sentence was a phrase that swallowed everything before it: irrevocable delegation. It meant that once his name met the paper, the power he thought he was buying would belong to a board he couldn't dissolve. He would be their signature, not the other way around. He read it once, twice, then leaned back, staring at me as if my reflection had surfaced inside the glass table. "How did you catch that?" he asked again, softer. "Because I used to read to save my life," I wanted to say. "Because when a man learns to steal with words, he can empty your house without ever breaking a lock." Instead, I swallowed and said, "I know how traps look when they want to be pretty." A muscle in his jaw flickered. He reached for his phone, called for his internal counsel. Not the men who had entered with him, but a woman named Celeste, whose eyes when she arrived were sharp and tired and honest. She read where I pointed, then circled 3 other clauses I had missed, each a string tied to the same noose. When she looked up, her expression was tight. "Who drafted this?" "Halverson and Pike," Logan said, his voice gone cold. "And the partner was recommended by..." He stopped, and I saw the knowledge strike him like a fist, "by someone on my board." Celeste nodded, once the small nod people give when the obvious hurts. "We need to delay the signing. And we need to find out who shepherded this language through." Logan's gaze flicked to me again. I dropped my eyes to the rag in my hand, suddenly desperate to disappear. I had climbed out on a limb without thinking whether it could hold me. If I fell, I would fall alone. "You've done enough," Celeste said gently, as if reading the terror in my shoulders. "Thank you." I gathered my cart and backed away, heart punching against my ribs. Outside the boardroom, the hallway hummed with the anxious music of money phones, chiming heels, tapping voices pretending at calm. HR stopped me before the elevator, lips pinched, tone cool. "We've received a report that you disturbed an executive meeting, Clara." "Disturbed?" I almost laughed. I whispered 3 words. "Nevertheless," she said, savoring each syllable. "Interfering beyond your scope can be grounds for termination." I nodded because I had been fired for less. But beneath the "yes ma'am" lay a thin seam of anger I had learned to bury. How easily the powerful talked about scope, as if a fire respected the boundary between rooms labeled yours and mine. By the time I reached the service corridor, my hands had begun to shake. I leaned my forehead against the cool concrete and breathed the way the free clinic therapist had taught me: 4 counts and 6 out, until my lungs remembered they could. I told myself to return to the floor plan I knew: mop bucket cloth corner. Keep your head lowered. Pretend you've never seen a dagger dress like a ribbon. That evening, while the office thinned to a skeleton, I found a thin envelope taped under the lip of the boardroom credenza. It wasn't addressed. Inside was a photocopy of an email the partner from Halverson and Pike, writing to a burner account with a single line: "Paradirective, from EVP Evelyn Shaw, language, inserted as discussed." Beneath it, a confirmation of wires. Numbers that made my stomach drop. Evelyn. The woman with the cleanest smile in the room, the one who always thanked the staff by their first names. I had buffed the print from her glass awards until my wrists ached. I had believed her kindness because it had cost me nothing too. My first thought was to take it straight to Celeste. My second was to burn it. Paper had ruined my life once, lease agreements with clauses my ex-husband pretended not to understand. Credit lines he opened in my name because we're a family baby. Fine print that turned love into collateral. Another document had found me here. Another set of lines would decide whether I could buy groceries. The world could be measured in signatures. I put the envelope back where I'd found it, and finished my shift polishing the boardroom table as if it hadn't almost swallowed a man whole. When I left, the January air cut through my coat and made my bones ring. On the bus, I texted my sister to tell her I would be late tomorrow morning, that I'd take her son to school if she covered my afternoon. We had learned to barter hours the way other people bartered stock. When I returned the next day, a message waited for me at the service desk. Clara, conference room B. Now. No signature. My stomach slid into my shoes. He was there. Logan alone. No lawyers, no entourage. He stood at the window with his hands in his pockets, the city stacked in squares of winter light. When he turned, I saw that he hadn't slept. Someone sent me proof, he said. The EVP is involved. I kept my eyes on the carpet. I cleaned the EVP's office, I said carefully. I don't know what she does on paper. He studied me for a beat that lasted a year. I know who found it. Celeste traced the printer ID. It doesn't leave this room, but you should be careful. People who hide traps don't like witnesses. Heat crawled up my neck. Am I being fired? His mouth quirked, not a smile. No, I'm asking for your help. The words dropped between us like a stone into a still pond. I gripped the back of a chair to keep my hands from showing their tremor. I'm a cleaner, Mr. Bennett. You're a reader, he said. You're a survivor. And you see what's meant not to be seen. He paused. I'll pay you as a consultant off books until we formalize it. But I need you to keep doing your job exactly as you have, except this time lift the corners. Study the places everyone assumes are dust. I thought of Rent, of the folder in my cabinet marked Court, the custody hearing that still scratched its claws against my calendar once a month. I thought of the way HR had said scope, as if dignity had a badge you could scan. Then I thought of Evelyn's plaque, catching the morning light like a blade. I'll help, I said. The words tasted like iron. But if they come for me, they won't, he said. And the promise in his voice was so steady that for a second I wanted to lean my whole life against it. Not while I can stand between you and whatever loves to devour. I nodded and he handed me a slim notebook. No emails, he said. No texts. If you find something, write it here. Leave it in the broom closet on the 23rd floor. He turned back to the window. I turned toward the door. I had almost reached it when he said, Clara. I looked back. His face was unguarded in a way I hadn't seen even when he'd put down his pen. Thank you, he said. 2 words I had mopped off more tables than I could count. And yet from him now they bent the room towards something I didn't have a name for. By noon the gossip had found my name. The security guard who nodded too quickly, the receptionist who held my badge a beat too long. In the EVP's office, a drawer that used to slide smooth now caught at the lock, and when I looked up, Evelyn stood in the doorway with a paper cup and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Careful with the wood, she said lightly. It scratches. I lowered my gaze and said yes, ma'am. But my pulse was a drum against my throat. When she walked away, I opened the stuck drawer and found a shred of glossy paper wedged in the track. A corner of an invitation embossed with a crest I recognized from the merger binder. A private celebration date set for the day after the signing. The guest list was short and cruel. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Bring him to the balcony, we'll toast the transition. I slipped the scrap into my pocket, heart pounding. The balcony. My mind saw polished stone railings that gleamed like clean bone, a city spread beneath like a promise. I didn't know why the word made my skin crawl, but it did. That night I wrote 3 lines in the notebook and left it where he'd said. When I returned to my locker, a single white card lay on the shelf. No name, no seal. Just 4 words that turned my mouth dry. Stop looking, or fall. I stared at the card so long the words seemed to blur and sharpen again. Each letter a blade. Stop looking, or fall. My fingers went cold, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I'd scrubbed gum off subway tiles, bleach burned my hands raw, endured the condescension of people who didn't know my name. But this was different. This was threat, not dismissal. Whoever had slipped that card into my locker wanted me afraid enough to back away. But fear had been the air I'd breathed for years. Fear of eviction, of custody hearings, of collectors pounding at my door. It had taught me how to fold myself into corners, how to survive on crumbs of hope. And now, for the first time in my life, fear made me lift my chin. If they thought I was too small to fight, they'd underestimated the endurance of the invisible. The next morning, I delivered the scrap of the invitation to the notebook, folding it between the pages as proof. When I checked back at the end of my shift, the notebook was gone. He had it. Logan. I tried to carry on as usual, mopping corridors, emptying bins, replacing the discreet air fresheners executives like to pretend just appeared on their desks. But every corner of the building seemed to watch me. Evelyn's assistant lingered too long at the copier. A security guard I'd known for months asked to see my ID twice in one day. Even the lawyers who had once sneered at me now fell silent when I entered the room, as if my rag could soak up more than dust. 3 nights later, Logan summoned me to the small conference room at the back of the 23rd floor. The blinds were drawn, the lights dimmed to amber. He stood with Celeste, the lawyer, whose honesty cut sharper than glass. On the table lay my notebook open to the page, with the invitation fragment. "You were right," Celeste said, her voice steady. "There's a private meeting scheduled after the merger. The balcony detail." She tapped the scrap. "Isn't decorative. We think it's symbolic. Or worse." Logan's jaw clenched. "They want me vulnerable, in public, in celebration, surrounded by press and shareholders. A single moment of weakness, a single step in the wrong direction, and..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I pictured champagne glasses lifted high, a city glittering beneath, and one body missing from the toast. I gripped the back of a chair. "Why tell me?" "Because you started this," Celeste set her eyes on me. "You saw what no one else wanted to see. And if they know you're looking, you're in danger too. Danger." The word sat heavy in the room. Logan turned to me, then his gaze softening just enough to break through my defenses. "Clara, you don't have to be part of this anymore. You've done more than I ever expected. Let me handle the rest." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to fold back into the quiet corners, to vanish where I was safest. But the truth clawed out of me before I could stop it. "I can't go back." My voice cracked, but I kept going. I've lived too long swallowing lies, cleaning up the mess of men who thought I'd never notice. If I step aside now, I'll be invisible again. And I'd rather risk falling than vanish. The room went still. Logan studied me for a long moment, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Then we move carefully," he said. The plan they laid out wasn't cinematic or grand. It was careful, stitched from shadows. Celeste would leak just enough to delay the signing, framing it as routine due diligence. Logan would act oblivious, letting Evelyn and her allies believe the trap was still intact. And me? My job was to keep seeing. To watch the corners, to notice what the others ignored. But plans are only as strong as the secrets they protect. The night before the rescheduled signing, I found my locker pried open. Nothing was stolen except the notebook. My chest caved. Without it, Logan wouldn't know what else I'd uncovered. And worse, whoever had taken it now knew everything I had written. I ran to the 23rd floor broom closet, heart hammering, and found another card taped inside. 4 words again, cruel in their simplicity. "Last chance. Stay quiet." My hands shook, but I tore the card down, shredding it into confetti. I wasn't staying quiet. Not now, not ever. The following morning, the building buzzed like a hive ready to swarm. Journalists clustered in the lobby. Executives rehearsed smiles sharp enough to cut. And Evelyn glided through the halls like a queen who had already claimed her throne. I followed behind with my cart, invisible as ever, but my eyes caught every detail: the whisper exchanged at the elevator, the phone pressed too long to an ear, the flash of nerves disguised as arrogance. And when the board gathered in the glass room with its view of the city, I was there too, polishing the corners, rag in hand, as Logan prepared to pick up his pen again. This time the silence was heavier than marble. The glass walls of the boardroom gleamed so brightly they almost blinded me. The city sprawled beyond, glittering like it had no idea what was about to happen inside this room. Men and women in tailored suits settled into their seats, voices lowered, eyes sharp. Evelyn sat near the head of the table, her smile precise, a blade wrapped in silk. And Logan, he stood at the center, pen in hand, every inch the man in command, though I could see the tension in his shoulders like a cord pulled too tight. I moved along the edges, rag in hand, pretending to polish surfaces already spotless. My pulse hammered against my ribs, but I kept my head bowed, listening. Evelyn leaned forward, her tone dripping with false warmth. "Logan, Once this is signed, Bennett Enterprises will have a future brighter than any of us dreamed. I glanced at the papers before him. My stomach dropped. The clause, the trap was still there, rewritten but intact. They thought they'd hidden it again, dressed it in new words. And Logan was about to sign. I froze. Should I speak? The last time I whispered, I nearly lost my job and gained enemies I couldn't see. But if I stayed silent now, he'd be finished. My throat burned, but I forced the words out, barely more than breath. It's still there. Logan's head turned, his eyes finding mine across the table. A spark flickered there, recognition, trust. He lowered the pen, scanning the page again. Evelyn's smile faltered. What is it? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Celeste, seated near the end, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She traced the paragraph with a lawyer's precision, then looked up. She's right. It's the same delegation clause. Buried deeper this time, but it's there. Murmurs erupted around the table. Evelyn's mask cracked just for a heartbeat before she rearranged it into a look of practiced surprise. That's absurd. Surely it's just a misinterpretation. Logan's voice cut through her performance like a blade. Enough. He pushed the contract aside. I've seen enough of your games. The room went silent. Evelyn's face drained of color, but her eyes glittered with venom. She rose, gathering her papers with a sharp flick. You'll regret this, Logan. Walking away now will cost you everything. He didn't flinch. Better to walk away free than to sign myself into a cage. I stood still, breath caught in my throat as Evelyn swept out of the room. The other board members shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves, but Logan's gaze never left me. And for a moment, in that vast room of power and wealth, it felt like we were the only two people who mattered. When the meeting dissolved, I tried to slip out unnoticed, but his voice stopped me. Clara. I turned, my rag clutched tight in my hand. Yes, sir. He walked toward me, his step steady, his expression unreadable, then softer, almost human. He said, You saved me, twice now. I shook my head, words tangling in my throat. I only saw what others didn't. His eyes searched mine, steady, intense. And you spoke when silence would have been safer. That's not just seeing, Clara. That's courage. The heat rose in my chest, a mix of pride and fear. I wasn't used to being acknowledged, let alone praised. My life had been about blending into the background, surviving quietly. Yet here he was, placing me in the center of a story I never thought I'd belong to. But as I left that room, one thought clung to me like a shadow. Evelyn wasn't finished. Her threat echoed in my ears. You'll regret this. And I knew people like her didn't give up their power without a fight. For the first time, though, I didn't feel alone. The fallout came faster than I expected. The next morning, whispers swirled through the building like smoke from a hidden fire. Evelyn hadn't shown up to the executive floor. Some said she was sick. Others claimed she was out meeting investors. But the truth revealed itself when Logan called an emergency meeting. Evelyn had been removed from the board pending investigation. The shock rippled across every face in that room. Some were pale with fear, others angry at their own missed chances. But beneath the noise I sensed something darker, resentment, that the invisible cleaning lady had been the one to pull the thread that unraveled Evelyn's scheme. I kept my head down, mopping the same square of marble, long after it gleamed, trying to silence the unease in my chest. If Evelyn had allies, and she did, they wouldn't forget me. That evening, Logan asked me to meet him in his office. The skyline burned with sunset behind him, casting his silhouette in firelight. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes heavier than I had ever seen them. You were right again, he said simply, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of wire transfers, private emails, a trail leading directly to Evelyn and two other executives. We would have signed away the company. My father's legacy. Everything. His jaw tightened. I owe that to you. The words caught me off guard. I had never been owed anything in my life. I wanted to deflect, to say I was just lucky, just observant. But something in his eyes, something raw, kept me quiet. Clara, he said softer now. You've lived in shadows long enough. You see what no one else sees because you've had to. And that is something I need beside me. My breath caught. Beside him. Not beneath, not invisible. My hands trembled around the rag I still held. And I hated that instinct that I couldn't stand empty-handed, that I had to cling to proof I belonged here at all. I don't know how to be beside someone like you, I whispered. His gaze softened, almost tender. You already are. For a moment I allowed myself to believe him. To believe that my years of scrubbing, my silent endurance, had led to this moment of being seen. But hope is dangerous. It opens doors you've taught yourself to keep locked. That night, as I walked home through streets washed in neon and rain, a black car slowed beside me. The window rolled down just enough for a voice to cut through. You should have stayed quiet. The car sped off before I could see the face, but the message was clear. Evelyn might have been stripped of her title, but her reach was long, her claws still sharp. When I reached my apartment, I found the door ajar, my chest seized. Inside drawers were pulled open, cushions sliced, papers scattered. My few belongings, cheap jewelry, a faded photo of my mother. The twins' old toys I kept in a box were strewn across the floor like trash. Nothing valuable had been taken, but the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't theft, it was a warning. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the photograph to my chest, tears burning hot down my face. Fear, grief, anger, they all roared inside me, but louder still was resolve. They thought they could scare me back into invisibility. They were wrong. The next morning I walked into Logan's office, still trembling, the photo clutched in my hand. I placed it on his desk. They came into my home, I said, my voice breaking but strong. They want me afraid. They want me gone. But I won't run. He looked at the photo, then at me, and for the first time his hand reached across the desk, not commanding, not testing, but offering. I placed my hand in his, and for the first time in years I felt steady. We weren't just fighting contracts anymore. We were fighting for survival. Logan didn't hesitate after I told him about the break-in. His first call was to private security, his second to Celeste, and his third, though he tried to hide it from me, was to someone in law enforcement. Within hours, 2 men in dark suits were stationed outside my apartment, their presence both comforting and suffocating. I wasn't used to anyone guarding me. I'd spent my life guarding myself, but fear has a way of bleeding through even the thickest walls. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building made my body tense. I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling, clutching the faded photo of my mother like a talisman. I thought about how many times she had told me, "Never let them silence you, Clara. Even whispers carry." I hadn't understood then. Now I did. The next morning Logan insisted I stay at his estate until things were settled. His house was nothing like my cramped apartment. It was wide and bright walls lined with glass that made the outside world look like a painting. But inside me there was still the echo of broken drawers, of strangers' hands rifling through the pieces of my life. At breakfast, Logan set down his coffee cup and said, "Evelyn won't stop. She'll come at me through the company, through the press, through people like you. I won't let that happen." I wanted to believe him, but doubt was a stubborn companion. "She already has," I said softly. "She broke into my home, Logan. She made sure I knew she could reach me anywhere. What if next time it isn't just a warning?" His gaze hardened, a storm behind his eyes. "Then we make sure there isn't a next time." The days that followed felt like living in two worlds. By day I still wore the uniform of a cleaner, pushing my cart through gleaming halls, pretending to polish glass, while my ears caught whispers of betrayal. By night I sat with Logan and Celeste, piecing together the fragments. We had emails, invitations, scraps of paper that painted a picture of greed disguised as ambition. But Evelyn was clever. She had built layers of protection, proxies who signed her orders, shell companies that hid her money. Every time we thought we had her cornered, she slipped through another door. Then one evening, as I was emptying trash bins on the executive floor, I found something, a crumpled receipt buried beneath shredded paper. It was for a wire transfer to a consulting firm overseas, signed not by Evelyn, but by another board member I'd never suspected. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just Evelyn. She had allies deeper than we knew. I brought it to Logan, laying it on his desk with shaking hands. "It's not just her," I said. "She has others helping, people you trust." His face darkened as he read, and when he looked up, the weight in his eyes told me he already knew the name. "Harrison," he whispered. "He's been with me since the beginning." The betrayal cut deeper than any clause in a contract. I could see it in Logan's clenched jaw, the way his hand trembled before he stilled it. "If Harrison's in this, then the rot is worse than I thought." I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was dread. The more truth we uncovered, the closer danger crept. I remembered the card in my locker, the voice from the car window, the ransacked apartment. Every warning had been real. That night, as I walked through Logan's halls toward the guest room he'd given me, I caught my reflection in the glass. I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Not just a cleaner anymore, not invisible. Someone standing on a line between survival and war. And deep in my chest I knew the battle was coming to a head. Evelyn and her allies had already threatened me once. Next time, they wouldn't settle for warnings. The final confrontation didn't come with warning, it came like a storm breaking glass. The merger signing had been rescheduled, and this time the press was invited. Cameras, microphones, flashing lights, everything designed to make Logan look triumphant, as he bound himself to the very deal meant to ruin him. Evelyn wasn't there, at least not visibly, but I felt her presence like a shadow at my back. And Harrison sat confidently at the table, his pen poised, his smile calm and convincing. I pushed my cart through the room, invisible as ever, my rag damp in my hand. My heart pounded so loud I thought the microphones might catch it. On the surface, the documents looked pristine, new drafts polished by lawyers, scrubbed of the obvious traps. But I had learned that rot doesn't stay gone, it hides deeper. As Logan reached for the pen, I saw it. A single line buried in the appendix, phrased in language so clean it almost slid past me. Contingent oversight by advisory council. Innocent words, but I knew what they meant. Control stripped away, disguised as routine counsel. They had hidden the poison again. My throat tightened. I could stay silent and vanish back into the world where no one knew my name. Or I could speak and risk everything, my job, my safety, my life. Don't sign. The words broke from me louder than I intended. The room stilled, cameras turned, the crowd murmured. Logan froze, pen hovering above the page. Harrison's eyes cut toward me, cold as steel. "She's nothing," he snapped. "A cleaner. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Celeste was already moving. She yanked the appendix forward, eyes scanning, lips tightening. "She's right," she said firmly, her voice ringing through the microphones. "It's the same trap. Dressed differently, but it strips executive authority once this is signed." Gasps filled the room. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking wildly. Logan set the pen down slowly, then turned his gaze to Harrison. "Is this your work?" he asked, his voice quiet, dangerous. Harrison faltered, his mask cracking for the first time. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," Logan cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. "Security." Two guards moved forward, and the room erupted in chaos, shouts, flashing lights, board members scrambling. Harrison's protests were drowned in the noise as he was escorted out, his face twisted with fury. Through it all, Logan never looked away from me. His eyes met mine, steady, burning, filled with something more powerful than gratitude, trust. When the room finally emptied, when the chaos ebbed into silence, he crossed to me. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking softer now. "You didn't just save me. You saved everything my father built. You saved the company. You saved the truth." I swallowed hard, clutching my rag, my hands trembling. "I just did what I had to. I couldn't stay quiet." He studied me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "You were invisible because the world wanted you to be, but you were never small, never." Tears stung my eyes, but for once I didn't hide them. For the first time, someone had seen me not as a cleaner, not as a burden, but as a woman who mattered. In the days that followed, the fallout spread. Evelyn fled the country, Harrison faced charges, and the merger collapsed in flames of scandal. The company survived not because of contracts or titles, but because one voice whispered when silence was safer. As for me, I no longer carried a mop into Logan's halls. My days of scrubbing floors were behind me. Logan offered me a position I never imagined, a role as his internal auditor, a title I wore not as charity, but as proof of what I had earned. But more than the job, it was the lesson I carried. Silence is a prison. And speaking, no matter how soft, can break chains the world swears are unbreakable. If my story touched you, let it remind you that even whispers can change lives. Please, like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. And if you've ever felt invisible, leave a comment, because your voice matters more than you know.